even though it's virtual. We have, there haven't been any chair's actions since we last met. Oh, apologies from Kathy Branson, Mark Burgess, Pete Taylor, the LMC, Healthwatch Suffolk, and also from Sadie as well. So I think Fiona and Shepherd will be ably guiding us through this afternoon's proceedings. The meeting is recorded so that it will be on the CCG website and on YouTube after this meeting. And I think also it will be signed as well so that the deaf community can access this. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations in relation to this afternoon? And can I also remind people to keep their declarations up to date, please? Rosemary.
Thanks, Doris. I noticed on the declaration of interest, one of my declarations seems to have dropped off, and that was being a member of the Northern Waveney practice, being a patient at one of the Northern Waveney practices. It was on there, but it's no longer on there, and it should be.
Probably shouldn't have dropped off. Would you mind just dropping an email to Martin Fitz, the government?
Martin who, sorry?
Fitz, I think, F-I-T-T. Or drop an email to Sarah, and I'm sure Sarah can forward it for you.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Tracy.
I mean, yeah, the locally commissioned services always are, although it's for a noting, it is still a conflict for those of us working in primary care, isn't it?
Thank you very much. Right, we'll move on, if there's no other declarations, on to the minutes of the last meeting. Can I ask people for any factual inaccuracies they want to bring up, or matters arising that are not in the agenda this afternoon? Is that legacy hand, Rosemary?
Apologies, Doris. Yes, it is.
Thank you. If there's no comments, I will take the minutes as approved for our April meeting, and I will move on to the action log, which is on page 16 of the pack. So we've got two closed items, item 99 and 103. And there are a couple of items which should probably be closed off today in terms of the risk register PC 15 after this meeting, and also the meds management. I think if we close those two, and if there's anything to bring forward as a result of discussion of the risk register, we can record that. And which then leaves one item outstanding, which was the interface update, which is going to come to the July BCCC meeting. I take no questions from that from anybody. Thank you. On to the forward planner, which is in our pack on page 18. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. We've paused we continue to pause the PCN updates, and the report from the Director of Primary Care partly were due to pressures of trying to working under still challenges with COVID-related issues. If there are no questions, I will move on. On to the risk register, and I think Shepherd, you're going to take us through this one.
Thank you, Doris, and good afternoon, everyone. There are 9 risk areas identified in this register, but for today, I will only focus on the 4 of the 9 that have been RAG rated as red. The risks in this report have been reviewed and updated since we met last month, and this includes the risk scores and the delivery dates. So as we prepare for our transitioning into the ICB, you will notice that there are recommendations that are being made for either transfer to the ICB of the risks or for those risks to be closed before the transfer. And these are all outlined in that report. And members are being invited to note the recommendations. I suggested for this month, it's noting with a view to approve them in our next month meeting before the transition to the ICB. In terms of the 4 of the 9 areas that have been identified as red, that is PC6, PC9, and PC11 and 15. I've also noted that there are some comments that have come from LMC colleagues, and that includes PC13. But I would suggest that for PC13 comments, we will address those with the LMC in our regular meetings, weekly meetings that we have with them. I'll probably make some remarks regarding PC6 in the context of LMC comments that they have made on those. So for PC6, this is about the delivery of the annual health checks for people with learning disabilities. And we have a paper letter in this agenda. But it's safe to say good progress has been made since we last met. And we'll be making some positive recommendations in terms of where this sits in the risk going forward. PC9, it's about medicines management, specifically on prescribing of the anxiolytics and the hypnotics. And there's a paper that you have again today. Just noting some positive improvements that the medicines management team have put in this update for May. Regarding PC11, you have an update in the paper, and you would notice that some of the planned meetings did not take place, but there was a key meeting that did take place as planned on the 3rd of May. And some good discussions took place there in terms of the interface challenges and the priorities. So there are actions that have been agreed, and I hope that those will be fed back at the next meeting in June in more detail. PC15, about capital funding. I have no additional comments to make. I thought it was a detailed update on that area from our estates team. Then to respond directly on PC6 in terms of the annual health checks, comments from colleagues from LMC, which were focusing on the contractual requirements for practices in terms of the annual health checks. The observations are correct. The target for annual health checks sits with commissioners and to work with practices to deliver those. So it's a commissioner target. So that observation is quite correct. And I think it's right that the commissioners have this target, because I think as a system, we have to work with clinical providers to be able to do that. And we've developed those strong relationships with practices to be able to deliver those. The focus on 75%, I think we are very clear that is not our local ambition as commissioners. We really need to reach out to all the families, individuals that have got learning disabilities and that needs our support. So whilst there is a 75% reference in the DES contract, we are interested more in reaching out to families, so we can manage that if there are issues arising from what the contract says and what is the right thing to do for people. Regarding PC13, I'll probably just reiterate, this is about resilience funding and associated kind of activity that will be addressed in our weekly meetings with colleagues from LMC. I will stop there if for any questions or any reactions from the members.
Thank you very much, Shepherd. Are there any questions in relation to the risk register anybody wants to raise? John.
Yeah, thanks, Doris, and thanks, Shepherd. I suppose my question was going to be on PC9, which is hypnotics and anxiolytics, and it might be that we cover this later in Michael's report, but I suppose this has been read obviously all year, as the chart shows at the bottom, and Michael often talks to us about the reasons why, but the gaps in the middle of the form, the risk form for each one, it talks about what are the current gaps in controls or assurances, and I wasn't clear how to articulate the problems that there are at the moment, because under the gaps in controls or assurances, it says the prescribing team are moving back to quit work alongside vaccination work. That's not a gap in control, that's a reflection on what we're doing to try and mobilise staff. So just keen to understand what are the gaps, what are the barriers to actually moving forward on this one, I suppose, because it's been a long-standing issue. And so it might be that we cover that under the prescribing report later.
I can talk to it a little bit now. Certainly, I mean, we can talk a bit more on the prescribing later. It is a little bit of a difficult one to undo, but as you can see from the data, it certainly is being undone at a reasonable rate. People will suffer withdrawal if they've been on anxiolytics long term. Hypnotics is less of an issue, so that's something that we'll be working on more as we've moved away from some of our support for vaccination, etc., and practices at risk. We will have some resources, and I've committed that we will reach out to outlier practices that aren't showing an improvement by the end of this month and offer to develop action plan and target patients who could be our quick wins in certainly in that area. So that is in train, and it's in the incentive scheme, which prescribing quality scheme, which will go out this week for further improvements. So targeted support to practices not currently showing an improvement, who are outliers, and incentives within the system is the new actions.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay.
My reflection would be that it sounds like what we've been doing previously, and the same practices tend to feature, and the same practices still don't seem to engage, is what the numbers are suggesting. That might not be the case in practice, but
I shall list the practices if you would like me to next month that we are reaching out to and their responses. Would that be helpful or not?
I'd find it helpful to understand that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Because often we reach out and the response doesn't come back, and that's where it all falls down, really.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Any other questions for Shepherd? I had just one query, really. Is on PC2, where we're talking about primary care estate strategy. The target delivery is for the end of June. So at the moment, there's no plans to transfer that to the ICB going forward. Is that date realistic, given the gap in insurance saying that the estate strategy is still not yet developed? It was more of a query for the team to go away and just have a think about it, because actually without this primary care estate strategy, we're going round and round in circles in terms of estate needs going forward into the future.
Absolutely. I'm happy to take that as an action with our estates colleagues to review that, if that is okay.
Thank you very much. If there's no other questions on the risk register, I will move on to the item 7, which is the learning disability health check, which I think is yours as well, Shepherd.
Indeed. Okay, so this will be an update from last month, and I think I've structured the paper to answer some of the questions that we had last month, which was about, can we get a feel of patient stories? So we've managed to get 2 stories that I think would be really helpful to actually illustrate what it is for families. And just to assure members that patient stories will be a regular feature in this report going forward. We really want to give you a good feel of the work that is going on the ground. And the second part of the report is going to focus more on our end of year position, which I'm really pleased that we have now received the numbers, and we managed to update that in time for this meeting today. Then the final part is going to be focusing on providing assurances for the following, I was going to say following year, we are already in that year already. So the questions we had again was around whether some of our reviews are they face-to-face or they're being done virtual. Whilst I thought as much that our reviews are being done face-to-face, I had to go and check. So I made contact with a number of practices, and I spoke to our teams that are carrying out some reviews. Based on that, I can safely confirm that our reviews are being done face-to-face, but I'm also keen to continue to reach out to practices just to ensure that yes, they are being done face-to-face. I know from other parts of the country, colleagues, that some reviews in other regions have been done virtually. So there's still more to look at that. Okay, so going into patient stories, we've anonymized details and gave you a little bit there. So person A, so this was a 48-year-old individual who had never had an annual health check, and there was limited information in the patient records, and the practice were consistently unable to reach out to the individual to arrange the checks. And the peripatetic team that works closely in the CCG, this is our health improvement nurse who is sitting in the CCG, but aligned to practices in Norwich, was able to intervene and agreed to carry out a home visit and to meet with the individual and facilitate the annual health checks to be done. And they understood the reasons why the individual was not able to have annual health checks. They didn't like visiting the GP practice. So clearly there were some perceived thoughts that stopped this particular individual to attend the practice. So the baseline observations were carried out in line with the annual health checks, and the individual eventually agreed to visit the practice to get the checks done. Clearly, you can see that it's actually the basic things that we need to do to build the trust to also be visible to individuals. So it's just feels like an extra effort that was done by the additional resources that we have in the CCG. But once that relationship is established, you can actually see that the trust between services and the individuals are done. So a bit of information giving there. Then the person B. So the individual had failed to attend all the previously booked health checks appointment. And again, the peripatetic team supported them to book an appointment, and they engaged with the mother on the day of the appointment. And we understand that the family was actually struggling on the day to actually support the individual to get to the practice. And the peripatetic team again were able to visit them and support the family to be able to bring them to hospital. And the checks identified that the individual had high blood sugars and also were likely to be diabetic. And the referral was completed to the local hospital for further assessments. And again, the peripatetic team were able to support the individual to attend the appointment. And the clinical assessment showed that they had diabetes, and further support for them to actually manage the new diagnosis they have. So I'll pause for a second there, but I just want to iterate again that I'm really looking forward to bring more cases in more detail in terms of the subsections of those particular people, especially touching into the inequalities kind of area, so we'll be better prepared for the future.
Thank you, Shepherd. It's really good to see some patient stories and actually the amount of support that they need to actually get the health checks done, and actually hopefully it will benefit their longer term health as well, as shown in your example. Tracy.
Yeah, thank you, Fisher. That's really helpful, and I think it does clearly, as Doris has said, and you've outlined that kind of personalised approach really does make that difference in people being able to access and kind of, you know, have those health checks undertaken in a very personalised way. So, I guess my question is, I mean, the peripatetic team is fantastic. I'm not sure how long we'll have that team for, if it's a longer term ambition to have that team, because certainly that personalised approach will be really challenging for primary care throughout Norfolk and Waveney to kind of be able to kind of have the capacity to deliver that, and that is the approach we know really works. So it's just a question in respect of that team's capacity going forwards and future kind of plans for that team, and kind of sharing that generally across primary care and primary care capacity to take that approach as well. We are looking more and more towards that personalised care approach, because that's what really works, isn't it? As you said, that makes a difference.
Absolutely. I'm really pleased that the CCG have supported the case for the extension of this function, and we've got an extension for another year. And I think during that time, we have to build long transformational and sustainable plans to replicate that. So we've got an opportunity to do that. And I think the key part of this role has been facilitation. So there's a bit about how do we empower families to reach out to different parts of the system, and this is just one part of that. So I think going forward, we should be able to bring how we are building that sustainability into this system. But it's a good question, it's a good test for us to bear in mind as we continue to improve the care and treatment for this group of people.
It's good to hear that there is funding for another year, but it's, you know, we actually need some long-term plans and rolling out across the whole patch as well, so that the whole population benefits from that support. But hopefully there will be plans in place in due course. Are there any other questions for Shepherd in terms of the LD report? It's good to see that we got up to 68.8%. We didn't quite hit the 75% target. Obviously some areas have done slightly better than others. John?
Yeah, thanks, Doris. And as you say, there was good progress made, wasn't there, in the last quarter? But a couple of things which follow on from discussion that we've had in previous meetings, really. One is the over 2,000 people that didn't have health checks last year. Will they be the priority for 22-23, so that we know that over a 15 or 18 month period, everybody will at least have been offered one and hopefully will have taken up a health check? And then linked to that, I suppose, that the report highlights a few times the fact that health checks tend to be back-ended in the year, as we've discussed before. But is there more that can be done to try and make them kind of business as usual throughout the year, so it's not then that rush as we're in the middle of winter to try and get more health checks done?
Thank you, John, for that. And I have to say, I paused only to get some reactions for patient stories, and I was going to continue to talk about the year end, because I think it does deserve some attention, and I think giving you more information on that would probably help to address some of the questions that may arise. So If it's okay, we'll continue and talk about the year-end position. And I think there's quite a lot that is not in this report. So what you have is an average 69%, but there is quite a lot built in there. So I was probably start by comparing how we have done compared to other parts of the system. We have done more checks than we have done before. We've reached out to more families than we have done before. And this is quite reflected in the number of people that we've reached up to almost 4,700 people against the register of almost 7,000. So there are approximately 2,000 people that we have not reached, as John has pointed out. But we are one of the largest system in terms of people with learning disabilities. And the areas that have performed, well, maybe let me step back a little bit. So I can confirm that none of the regions across the country have been able to hit the target. We are literally in the ballpark figure. We are the same. The closest region that nearly got to 75% was London, and they were able to hit 73%. But the register is nowhere near our size. Our register is comparable to Hertfordshire and West Essex, and they performed at 69%, and we are at 68%. The other parts of the system that have performed at 70% was Suffolk area, but their register is way, way smaller than ours. And if you look at in terms of improvements over the compared to the previous years, we are, I would safely say, we are the most improved system compared to all other systems. And you can just use the Q4 data to just illustrate that. If you look at all other systems, they have dropped this year, apart from ourselves and a little bit, I think, from Hertfordshire, they've maintained that. So in terms of improvements, we are on the up, and you can see that in that table that actually there's a huge difference in terms of improvements, not only comparing our own figures, but also comparing with others. Is quite a strong performance there. And we have gained much strength in understanding our own data, and which is really helpful in actually targeting the areas that we need to improve. Going into the following year, and I'll start by answering your question, John, around have we prioritized those that we have not done? Yes, we have, and we are doing that. We have the resources that are dedicated, still continuing in West Norfolk, which is one of the most improved area. This was the worst performing locality last year, and now they were almost at the top of all other areas. So that's a really marked improvement. And we've got dedicated attention going on in South, which was another area that was not likely to perform well. And it's focusing on those individuals that we have not reached out in the previous year. And we are building plans. We've got plans, and we're building other plans to make sure that we are able to build that long-term sustainable transformational program. We're working with the LD providers, most capable providers, which is Hertfordshire, NSFT, and others, to try and build a long-term sustainable program for this particular piece. So it's going to be a combination of the medium and long-term plans to be able to build a sustainable program for this population group. We've submitted our trajectory for the following year. You can see that we have stretched our ambition by 50%. Last year, I think the performance was in Q1 was about 10%, and we want to get even more than that. So that sets out our ambition of how we are going to distribute that activity throughout the year this year. We've also listed out what our game-changing kind of interventions, so the resource that still exists in the West, then also the PCN input that is going on in South, and the data cleansing that is taking place, and also the use of Protect Now, which I'm really positive about, as it that system looks well. We had an illustration of how it works with Eclipse and stuff, and how that combines with all other comorbidities. So I'm really excited about that piece of work with Protect Now. So I will stop there and then take any questions or any reactions from the members.
Thanks, Shepard. I hope that answered your question, John. You didn't want to come back on anything. Hein?
Yeah, it's actually a very similar point to John, but could I ask Shepard that the next time you report back on this topic, that we have some visibility on how many of the roughly 2,000 the team had not been able to attend to have been addressed? Because I think we've said it a few times, the 75% to an extent is an arbitrary target. We should aim for 100% over 16 months, and then maybe over time it becomes 100% in 12 months time, who knows. But I think some visibility would help the committee to be assured that's being attended to. So I just wanted to add that on. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just looking at the table where we've got the performance statistics, I think we're a bit of an outlier in terms of declines as well, because although we have a high population, we have a significantly higher number of declines compared to other areas, and if we can reduce some of that, it would actually obviously help performance, but actually probably hopefully improve the outcome for those people who have declined, and maybe as part of it is the stories that you've included in the pack at the beginning. So I think we need to probably do a bit more work on that as a system to understand and reduce the decline numbers. So there's no other questions. I will move on to the mental health check. Thanks, Shepard, for the very detailed update and the report as well. It was good to see the numbers and progress. So who's taking the Julian's just joined us. Perfect. Good afternoon, welcome. So you're just going to take us through the severe mental illness health check, take the paper as read, and just highlight anything that you want to draw our attention to. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be here to provide the first quarterly update following the initial report provided to the committee members around the improvement work done for severe mental illness. In terms of performance and the rationale of why I'm here today, it's to request committee members to consider and approve the proposed interventions outlined in the focus section of the paper. So where are we now in terms of Q4 data? A 10% improvement has been made comparatively to 38.9% compared to the previous quarter in Q3. We're not resting on our laurels. We know that there is still a large amount of work that still needs to be done to achieve the national target of 60%. But just relating back to a previous comment that was made, I would just like to reiterate our guiding principle on this improvement work is for 100% of all patients to access their mental health check within the year. Just some feedback before I delve into a little bit more of the intricacies in the paper. The feedback from some of the locality teams as well as GP practices is that practices are endeavoring to complete the annual health check as planned. However, they are competing with different priorities as well as some workforce constraints that does prove a constant challenge. this view was somewhat reinforced last week when I delivered a presentation to the Expert by Experience SMI patient group last week, whereby we covered some of the main barriers to checks. I outlined what, in a nutshell, what this paper to PCCC would be about, and just to gain some of their own insight into their experience in accessing the SMI health checks within Norfolk and Waveney. One of the things that came about from that paper was comments made around the scheduling of the annual check. So there was some comments that said some systems schedule it by birthday instead of annual recurring day. But I summarized my findings from that expert group into two main points. The first guiding principle was make every visit to primary care count. So my paper is scheduled just to look at and focus on primary care delivery of SMI checks, but it is mindful that there are SMI checks also conducted via NSFT in secondary care. So the first guiding principle was make every visit count. And the second one was what happens after the check. So what are the interventions that actually reinforce the point that if a smoking cessation check is done, are we offering smoking cessation advice? Are we doing lifestyle advice, etc.? So the monthly SMI working group that I chair and also lead on, we have reached out to other systems to find out what works well and what proof of concepts we could potentially adopt within Norfolk and Waveney. And the first one was highlighted in point number 2 on the current focus section of the paper, which was the staffing group consisting of mental health trained nurses to deliver SMI checks as well as eating disorders. And in terms of figures, we hope that it would result in 10 additional checks per week or 420 per year. And I'm just looking at the things in combination. If we combine it with the outreach work done by Together, which is a charity that works to coordinate the checks on behalf of the GP practice, I think there is a potential here to make some great wins. We're also exploring the use of digital innovation, so POC testing at home, which negates the need for a patient to go into the primary care practice, the usage of clinical apps to self-declare smoking statuses, alcohol consumption, etc. So in a nutshell, there is a lot of work that we are currently ongoing, but I'm here to ask and potentially also take questions on what the committee members feel about this paper, as well as some of the interventions outlined to help take our uptake figures for SMI checks to the next level and make it more sustainable for our patients. So I'll stop talking there. It was a whistle-stop tour, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Julian. That's very helpful. Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. It is really helpful. I mean, I think it is a kind of a group of our patients that really don't see these checks as a priority. So I guess there's a lot of kind of coaching, a lot of kind of behavioural change and various things, because it isn't a priority when life is complex and everything else, but for people. So I think that's something to consider. I think really listening to experts by experience as to the barriers, the reasons why, is absolutely crucial. So really pleased that you're doing that piece of work. I do think I really like the concept. I like the focus areas and the idea of making those contexts count, but I do think there is still a disconnect, certainly between NSFT and primary care. I'm even this week, I knew a patient had an ECG done at NSFT and I didn't see it. I wasn't able to access it. So there's something about ensuring those flows of information, where that contact, where elements of the check takes place, because they're not always in the same place, that we can bring that all together. So that's a piece of joining up work, isn't it, as well? And I think there's something, I kind of think there are elements that you could do virtually, but I think really with these patients, that they're patients that I would want to see, I do want to see as a clinician. So I think that kind of that personalized again approach is absolutely key. And I really like the work with Together, because I think having the voluntary community sector organisation involved in supporting really does make a difference, because they are very trusted often with the community as a trusted kind of connector to services as well.
If I may, Tracy, before I go to John, just 3 really quick thoughts. Number 1, the Expert by Experience group posed a very sensible suggestion in the form of a running coach. That's what apparently some of their relatives over in Manchester take part in, which is effectively a peer-to-peer support group. So rather than GPs calling and posting letters, they have a peer-to-peer group, which we might consider. The second point about the link between NSFT, one of the main points that we would like to further deliver is that leadership role in NSFT. I think that's something the mental health boards would really like to see input in, and I can definitely feel that it would address the gap between data transfer as well as continuity. And lastly, yes, one of the own GPs I spoke today in one of my meetings did say how how well do we take a data that's been self-declared by this vulnerable group of patients? Are we convinced that what they're declaring is correct using a self-care app? So there's still a lot of things to consider, but I'm quite impressed by the level of engagement we've received so far. So work in progress, definitely.
John?
Yeah, thank you. Just one comment and a couple of questions, if I may. So the comment just on sharing of information. Very conscious that we've procured a shared care record for the system that should be live from September, October this year. And I'm hoping this is exactly the sort of example which means that primary care clinicians will be able to see documents that originated from NSFT, for instance, and vice versa. So it could be another use case to play into that environment. In terms of the questions, though, I suppose a couple of basic ones. One was, we've got percentages in the paper. I've got no sense of how many patients we're talking about, because 38% of 100 patients is different to 38% of 10,000 patients in terms of obviously the workloads. It would be useful to understand that. In terms of the difficulties in trying to achieve the checks as well, it wasn't quite clear whether it's the capacity and availability of slots, if you like, or whether it's patients accessing and that there might be plenty of supply, but patients aren't accessing them for the reasons that Tracy said. And then thirdly, in terms of you ask of the committee, I don't think we can agree anything that's in here because there's nothing in terms of financial implications, for instance, or funding to understand what it might cost, how we'll be able to pay for it, etc. So I think there'll be a bit more work needed offline to progress those before it comes for decision.
Yeah, no, definitely, John. Thank you for those questions. I think just relating back, I think what I will just take it on for the next round, but effectively just in a summary for Q3, out of a register size of roughly 9,000 patients in Norfolk and Waveney, 2,000 have had their checks completed. So there is a gap in their numbers, but I will make that clear. In terms of trajectory, NHSE are now moving away from percentages in terms of targets. So they are looking at patients' number as a whole. So I think that will be quite a clear picture for the next round of papers. Yeah, I think I know I'm missing one of your questions, but just in the last one, I think it was more just to gain some insight and approval on the concepts that we're hoping to trial for this year. But I take your point that we're not requesting anything financially. So yeah.
Thanks, Julian. Just if I may, just on the middle question, is it an issue of capacity or is it an issue of patients accessing capacity?
Of course, it's both actually. So there are issues of capacity. There's variance in the system currently in terms of how much time is afforded to one physical health check. It ranges from about 20 minutes to 40 minutes in some well-delivering practices. There's also the issue of uptake. So there are a cohort of difficult to engage SMI patients who are off the grid in a nutshell. So we're hoping this proof of concept will target those hard to reach patients and then introduce them to the work done by Together so they have a link. But I will make that clear in the next update paper.
That's great, thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, I think Tracy pretty much summarised my comment. So I really like the current focus and the outline of the work going on. And I think it just really shows the value of what the voluntary and charitable sector can bring to support the wider healthcare system. I think it's a really good example. So really good work.
Thanks. I think I had the same problem, well, not same problem, same question as John in terms of, so where's the funding? I think the concept's great, but I think we need a bit more hard details. And sadly, you've got 3 accountants sitting in this as voting members, so you're slightly outnumbered when it comes to no numbers, no approval. But the concept, I mean, I may be wrong, but you know, the concept is great, but we need some hard tacks on the table.
I apologise. I will take that as a learning.
Thank you. Shepherd.
I just wanted to add on to what Julian has said, and also to provide some assurance in terms of we are learning from the learning disabilities annual health checks, and we are aware that we need to build more detail in terms of delivery plans and what sits beneath that. And we are looking to accelerate our grip on the SMI. So I think our presentation or information to this committee will continue to grow in strength and hopefully provide more assurance to the committee.
Thank you. So I think in principle, we're happy for the principle that a wee bit more detail is probably required. Thank you. We look forward to getting the next update with numbers on it.
Thank you.
That John is happy with. And maybe that's the harder ask, to be honest. Thank you very much. We'll move to the training hub update. I think, Fiona, are you taking this one?
Yes, I am. Thank you. This paper outlines the achievements in 21-22, but also I think we need to recognise there's an awful lot of work still to do. A good, I think, foundation has been laid, and we are planning to come back to committee with the plans and the priorities, and also clearly setting out the challenges that we're facing in terms of workforce and training and education. Part of the delay has been due to in bringing that information to you, is that with the new contract coming into place on the 1st of April this year, we've been working with HEE in the past few weeks to agree the mobilisation of the new contract, the key performance indicators, and obviously then how that feeds into what our priorities will be. So in terms of the maturity, I think you can see that the training hub, there have been improvements made compared to the last time we reported. I think in terms of key achievements, the fact that we've managed to get the shorts rounds up and running this month, and all the preparation that was done last year at the back end, is a big step forward, and certainly we're getting a lot of interest in those. The GP fellowship programme and the recruitment to that has been very successful, and we, at the end of March, we extended it to nurses, and have had a good level of interest, and we'll be able to bring more details in terms of numbers in the next paper. We've also been able to recruit to 4 new ambassador roles, and I think they will play a huge part in working with the primary care workforce around the paramedics, the AHP physician associates, to really understand their training needs and education and professional development, and what we can do as a training hub to support them, but also start to understand in greater detail the workforce challenges and how we can support that. So I think that's it is an important step forward, I think. Finally, I just wanted to say, obviously, the ARS roles, you can see the expansion that we have achieved in 21-22, and the target plan for the end of March 23 is to increase that to 376. But I think one of the real risks and one of the challenges we're going to have to understand and address how we can support that, is that in some cases it's been been impacting other parts of the system. So we need to understand what we can do to try and support that and reduce that risk. Clinical pharmacists being one profession, and paramedics as well. I'll pause there, but just to say, obviously, in terms of the priorities and the key risks that we need to bring forward really robust plans for around workforce planning, but also placement expansion. A lot of work is going on at the moment around increasing placement capacity. But there's still much more to do, and obviously that's a fundamental part of supporting workforce and increasing our workforce at the very beginning of their journey and careers. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Fiona. It's really good to see the maturity matrix. There was sort of quite a lot of reds this time last year, and now those have all disappeared, and lots of blues for completion. And so well done to the team for achieving that. Are there any questions for Fiona? John.
Yeah, thanks, Doris, and thanks, Fiona. It's a helpful report. And I was just going to pick up on the point you made towards the end there about understanding the impact of some of the R's roles, because it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because clearly there's good positive reasons for trying to recruit those more specialised roles into general practice. But you mentioned, I think, 47 pharmacists, 34 physios, 11 paramedics. They're all professions with shortages, aren't they? And how are we proposing to understand what impact that has had on provision elsewhere? And I suppose then, the so what question, are we planning to feed that back into some sort of workforce strategy or something going forwards for the system as a whole? Because it feels like we're understandably pursuing this in primary care for the right reasons, but it feels like it needs a bigger system approach to it, doesn't it?
It does, and we're working very closely with the ICS workforce team in looking at all the professions and how we can, I suppose, look at it from a Norfolk and Waveney perspective as well. You know, we need to be encouraging people to come and work in Norfolk and Waveney, and when they come to work or when they come to train, we need to be able to retain them. So that's one. But also, take paramedics, for example, you know, how can we look at the rotational model with East in a slightly different manner, supporting each other? And so that's just a sort of example that we are hoping to take forward this year. But yes, I mean, there are no easy answers. I do recognise that. But I think by working as a system, hopefully we can address some of the risks and mitigate them.
Thanks, Fiona. Rosemary.
Thanks, Doris. What sort of feedback have you had, Fiona, from practices on their use of Lantern, the flexible staffing pool?
We've had quite a mixed feedback. So I mean, I think it's still early days in terms of how practices feel about it. So that's one of the pieces of work that the team are looking at the moment, is just looking at the comments. I think there's been, because it's different in the way it works, there's been a period of transition. So practices have had to learn to post their what they want on the system. You know, it's a complete reverse of the way it worked before. So it's been a slow beginning, and we're finally starting to see, I suppose, numbers come forward. But yes, we do need to understand in a bit more detail, because it has been very mixed. The feedback has been positive and negative. Because
we were enthusiastic, but in actual, you know, implementation practice, it's not quite so straightforward, I think it's fair to say. Thank you.
Tracy?
Yeah, thank you. Really, really helpful. Just thinking about some of the R's roles and the new to practice course, which is obviously fundamentals for the nursing new to primary care. But I think it's really key to offer that to those R roles, because it is a little bit of a shock to the system when you suddenly come and work in primary care when you've worked in a big provider or somewhere different. So I'm really pleased to see that. And also thinking about the rotational of some of those R roles, I think it should be wider than probably, you know, paramedics. I think there's other kind of disciplines that would like to rotate and spend time in different areas of our health and care system. Certainly thinking from nursing cohorts, you know, I'm of a generation of nurses in primary care, and we're all going to retire in the not too distant future. So I'm thinking about what we're doing with that nursing workforce and rotating around sort of community nurses, acute nurses. I think there's options to do that within the ICS that we should explore further.
Tracy, I absolutely agree with you, and we are starting to have those conversations with the ICS workforce team and our system partners, because it is so much part of the retention. You know, if somebody's not working in one area and feels they want to retire or leave, well, maybe they'd be better off working somewhere else, slightly different environment, and maybe that, you know, with the right support, training and development to make that transition, that we actually retain them within Norfolk and Waveney. So absolutely agree with you, totally. Thank you.
I think there's also the bit about, you know, moving towards patient-centered care, and actually where's the best place to deliver services. That there is going to, in the future, some movements between different providers, so that the services are delivered in the right place. So actually, as a system, how do we enable that smooth transfer, so that people don't feel intimidated by, oh, I've got to go and work for somewhere else. But it's actually that patient focus bit that I think we need to develop. Andrew.
Yeah, just an observation really. The vast majority of comments coming into Healthwatch are about difficulties with access and also with continuity. That's not news, but I was just looking at some numbers, you'll be pleased with me. And if you divide the population of Norfolk and Waveney by the total number of whole-time equivalent partner and salaried doctors, it comes out at 2,200. Now, the long established safe limit is about 1,800. And that's I'm sure that's not unique to Norfolk, it's the same across the board. But I think that really does explain perhaps some of the reasons why, going back to earlier discussion as well, the trouble with getting up to those target figures for learning disability and SMI is because of lack of workforce. Now, I know that's not news, but I just thought it needs acknowledging, and be interesting to know what the longer term plans are, if anybody knows what they are.
Did you want to come back, Fiona?
I think, and thank you, Andrew. And across England, the GP to patient ratio is increasing. I think there are several factors, and we need to do more work to understand the underlying reasons behind it. Clearly, the change to a multidisciplinary team approach, and for patients receiving the right care from the right person, will help to alleviate the pressure on GPs. But obviously, we now do understand that patients do want to see their GP. We do need to understand. We do need to be able to retain our GPs. We also need to be able to retain the GPs who come to the local area to train, and we need to retain them in Norfolk and Waveney when they finish their training. And obviously that will help to. But Andrew, I freely admit there is a lot more work that we need to do to understand why GPs are leaving, why they're retiring, what the issues are, and then we can put the plans in place. And I fully admit that we're not where we want to be in terms of the workforce plans, and resurrecting them from a couple of years ago. And so really that has got to be our priority and key focus for this year.
Thanks, Fiona. If there's John.
Sorry, just a quick question back to Fiona on that, and forgive me if it's an ignorant question, but just linking to the R's roles as well, is that not meant to be part of the solution, recognising that numbers of GPs are declining? It's actually diversifying the workforce and having other roles in there. So the ratio for GPs might be higher, but actually, if you add in the R's roles, the ratios might be back to what we would expect them to be in terms of that kind of safe, reasonable level of care. That's it might be an ignorant question, I don't know.
Certainly, if you look at the direct patient care roles, some of which are funded by ours and some of which are funded by practices, there has been a dramatic increase in that workforce in the past few years, no doubt about it. So in terms of clinical support and clinical access for patients, that ratio, yeah, it is changing, and it's certainly a better ratio than the GP to patient ratio. I think the other aspect of it is, which we've talked about in the past, is helping patients to understand who is the right person to see for their particular need. And obviously we've just started the messages and the communications and media around that. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether that has an impact on how the different patients see and use practices and the different appointments that are available.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to item 10, which is we've got 3 CQC reports. Shepherd?
Thank you. I'm trying to navigate screens in front of me. Okay. Right. In terms of CQC reports, we've got 3 CQC inspection reports that we have received since the last time we have met. And I'm really pleased that 2 of the 3 practices have improved their position from before. So starting with Quarter Show, I know we did discuss in part 2 last time as an indication, but now we've got confirmation of that. So Quarter Show is a practice with a list of about 9,000 people, and it was previously rated as requires improvement in safe and well-led domain. But this time they have been inspected and they've been rated overall as good and good across all the 5 domains. So a lot of hard work would have gone into that, and well done to them. Then Millwood Partnership in Great Yarmouth and Waveney. This is a slightly bigger practice with a list of almost over 20,000 people, and were previously rated as requires improvement, and now rated as overall good and good across all the 5 domains as well. So those are the good news that we have. Then we have Hitcham Group in West Norfolk, practice list size of approximately about 8,000 people. We indicated last month that we were not expecting a positive report, and I can confirm that this practice was rated as inadequate overall, and also in 3 domains around leadership, safe services, and effectiveness. It was rated good in caring, which is positive, but requires improvements in the responsiveness of their services. Some work started much earlier with the practice to build up an action plan, which has been agreed, and we're working closely with CQC colleagues and our quality team. I know Chris is on the line as well, and medicines management team are well engaged in working with the practice to improve the position, and that also includes a regular meeting with CQC. In addition to all that support that has been put in place, the practice has also agreed an external support, which involves another GP working closely with them on twice a week, which is really positive. So the issues are being managed, and we are not escalating anything at this point. We're confident that we'll be able to work with the practice to make those changes. The feedback from CQC is that the practice is working positively, and we should work closely with them and support them to turn this around.
Thank you, Shepherd. It's disappointing to see Heacham in there. I suppose I'm kind of thinking about the paper you provided us with. I think it was either the last meeting or the meeting before, where we've got the list of all the practices and the different ratings, and there was an awful lot of practices on there that haven't had an inspection for an awfully long time, and Heacham was in part of that group because it's gone from 2016 to 2022. Do we have a concern that there are other practices out there that could be in a similar situation, in that they've not had an inspection for a while and things have slipped?
We do, but I have to say that we've started working with those practices, and some discussions are taking place to agree the support that is required to go into there. But I guess with the numbers of practice that we will have to catch up with, considering West Norfolk has not been, almost all of them have not been inspected for over 5 years. So there's some work, a program of work that we need to firm up with that particular locality area.
So do we have any concerns about patient safety at Heacham, seeing that they scored red on the safe bit?
There are no specific patient concerns that have been brought up or escalated to the CCG from the work that is happening. But there are specific issues, I think, around the medicines management, the dispensary kind of elements. So it's the areas that could lead to specifics. But as it stands, there are no specific patient concerns that have been raised.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Shepherd? John?
Yeah, thanks. I was just following up that line of questioning there, I suppose. A couple of things. One is, I think quite often when we see reports that aren't so good, it quite often comes back to medicines issues, doesn't it? And I don't know if there's anything, I suppose, from Michael's perspective in terms of learning that we've got from that to try and do things preemptively over and above what I'm sure we're doing already. And the other question would be, I suppose, for Heacham as a specific practice, looking back, were there any kind of early warning signs that we thought we could have picked up on? Anything, again, that could have been done preemptively, do we think, to support them before they got to this stage?
I don't know whether Michael, okay.
Do you want me to come back on that? Okay. Yeah, I mean, there are common issues with medicines, and we won't necessarily know about them unless we're in each practice on a regular basis. That particular practice has traditionally allowed our team in, which is a bit of an issue. They do have their own PCN pharmacy support, but they're limited in their scope as well. It would be lovely to have a you know, a rolling program of visits, which we used to before NHS England had the responsibility, and then, you know, do basically a visit that looked at their dispensary, etc., and then we would discover their presence or not of SOPs. I think was one of the issues around and, you know, governance around various aspects, which I perhaps won't go into. But yeah, it relies on good working relationships. Traditionally in the West, that they're less amenable, I think, is historically, certainly. So we would love to be able to offer, you know, rolling programs, certainly an annual visit, and prevent these things from happening. Perhaps that's something, Shepherd, perhaps we need to work up in and look at the resource that we have as we recruit to our vacancies, and perhaps create a post who looks at these sorts of things, and in the spirit of preventing bad things from happening, is more proactive, but without cooperation and the spirit of quid pro quo, it's difficult at the moment. But perhaps we change our tack, and we'll have a chat then, Shepherd, perhaps about being more proactive if we have the resource to do that, given all the other priorities we have to deal with.
Okay, thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, can I just ask what's in place to communicate with the patients of the practice when a practice receives an adequate rating? It has an effect locally. These things tend to get in the local papers, or at least talked about locally, and probably undermines the confidence of the local population, which is not altogether fair, because I've always noticed, and I've read lots and lots of CQC reports, nearly always the caring part is rated good, no matter what the other parts are, and that applies to general practice, it applies to hospitals as well. So there can be a lot of problems, but I think we have to be very careful to reassure the local population that they're still being served well, as long as that's the case, of course. Any thoughts on that?
I don't have a well-informed response in terms of the actions that the practice has taken to communicate with its local population. But I will be also interested to take this to actually understand what communication goes from the practice to the patients, and I think more widely. And I'm aware that Chris Turner, our head of quality, is also on the call. He may have some insights as well on that, and if he's able to respond to that.
Yeah, thanks, Shepherd. I think it's a really good point, Andrew. So I know certainly for care homes, one of the things the CQC would expect is once a care home's been inspected, regardless of what the report says. So, for example, if they're rated inadequate, that report should be available in the kind of you know, as you come into the building. So it should be, now clearly how that's displayed, that could be in a folder, it could be on the wall or something for people to look at, but certainly it shouldn't be hidden. But I think you're right, Shepherd. We probably just need to explore that, because I don't think I'm certainly not aware that there's any specific things that general practice do in regards to sharing a CQC report like that. The comment I just wanted to raise just around meds management, just going back to what you were saying, John, is a really good point. And I think even in a lot of the CQC reports where practices have been rated overall as good, there are often recommendations in there for things that can be improved around meds management. So it definitely is a big area, and one of the areas of focus in September, which is World Patient Safety Day, the focus this year from the World Health Organization is around medicines management. So I've had a meeting this morning, an ICS meeting with the patient safety specialists across the patch, and Jessica Adcock, Michael from your team, was there. So looking at almost doing a calendar of events through the month of September. And we've had some really good ideas about looking at patient journeys across the kind of calendar month, and whether that be, you know, reinforcing certain policies or certain practices, but really tracking it through and looking at the impact of kind of discharges on care homes, right across the piece, primary care as well. So we've got a further meeting in a few weeks' time to kind of really look at that programme. And also Shepherd and I and some other colleagues are getting together in next week, I think it is, to look at what we can be putting on for primary care proactively, and medicines management will be one of the key parts of that. So I think it's fair to say medicines is high on the agenda.
That's very good to hear, Chris. Thank you. Rosemary.
Thanks, Doris. I mean, as far as primary care goes, my understanding is, and I believe it's a contractual requirement, that on your website, your practice, you have to have a link to your most recent CQC report. And that has to show your rating, but it also has to be a direct link, so patients can click on that link and go straight to the report from your website. And also, certainly when we first started being inspected, we also did have to display whatever our report was, you know, at the front desk where patients could see. So certainly patients should be able to access the report. I think possibly where practices don't do as much, I mean, certainly my own experiences, we're not very good at actually explaining that report to patients. They can read the report, but we don't do an awful lot, certainly in the way of mitigating if it's not a very good report. We're all a bit shell-shocked from having had a bad report, and we post it on its entirety, but I don't think practices do an awful lot maybe about you know, reassuring patients, and maybe that's something that the patient participation groups could get involved with at the practices to help to sort of, you know, disseminate out maybe the more positive aspects to just sort of bring some balance in.
That sounds like a good plan. I was going to say involve the patient participation group.
Or just to bring, you know, not because we want to slant the report anyway, but just to bring in some, you know, some other perspectives as well, which I think might be helpful.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, just briefly to comment on that, I've just gone on the Heacham Group Practice website, and it says on the front page CQC inspected and rated inadequate, but it doesn't give any context, which is the point Andrew's making, I think, to reassure people. So if you go on that front page, you think, oh, that's not very good. It doesn't mention in good for caring, for instance. So yeah, it would be good to understand a response to that.
And CQC reports are extremely impenetrable for anybody who's not tuned in to read. I defy anybody to make sense of them, frankly.
Yeah, whether there is, any scope within the CCG communications team just to give them a wee bit of support to help them, explain and give assurance to their public as well. Chris?
Yeah, no, just to build on that, I think the other thing we need to remember is often if the report is, requires improvement or inadequate, often whether it be a hospital or a practice or a care home, by the time the report is actually published within the public domain, the provider's normally done quite a lot of work to remedy some of the situations. So I think the other thing we have to be mindful of is, it can become out of date very quickly, and it's not necessarily very accurate for all that long because of work that will be undertaken, once the feedback's been provided to that provider.
Yeah, I suppose it's that balance bit, isn't it? This is what's found 3 months ago, and this is what happened since, so that people are not overly concerned when things are under control. Rosemary.
I think one of the outcomes of COVID, which I think has been helpful, is that the CQC, because obviously they realise there's a huge backlog of visits now because they've got, effectively lost 2 years. They are now doing sort of background reviews of practices without actually coming out and visiting. And it is quite useful because certainly on our website, I can't speak for other practices, it automatically posts a link on there to show their most recent updates. So for instance, I know from our practice, we had an update on the 5th of May and it's already posted up there. So there's certainly little snapshots. It's not like a full inspection, but it's a little snapshot basically to say, the CQC haven't found anything of concern at this present moment. And they are a little bit more in real time, as opposed to the actual full visits, which you're absolutely right, Chris, come out, by the time we get the report, it's sometimes 6 weeks later, which frankly, we've already started to put remedial action in place. But at least these little snippets do, I think, help to reassure patients a bit that, the CQC is keeping an eye, albeit in a remote way.
Thank you. That's very helpful insight, Rosemary. Thank you. If there's no other questions, I will move on to item 11, which is the locally commissioned service. I think I saw Gina a minute ago, so I think she's lurking in the background. I surprised you by not running early today.
And I'm very grateful for it, but I am prepared.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. So it's a very brief paper this time, as you would imagine, as we're now starting to get towards kind of main delivery stage. I will assume that the paper is read as normal. I'm on one screen today, so you must apologise. I should be flicking backwards and forwards. So the key highlights is the North Norfolk phlebotomy for the 2 practices that are taking it in-house, where Sheringham Cromer has commenced and seems to be going well. We're touching base with them regularly, and we are on target at the moment for the transition for the Swan practices to move over as of the 1st of June from EC. They're just going through the final elements of consultation for that. The warfarin rollout for the East is underway. We've actually bit of a groundbreaking this week, so we know that we're now on target for the 1st of July, or Q2, shall I say, with regard to the transfer of data and enabling and making sure that our practices are ready to move forward. So that's very positive, and we're grateful for that. And just on that point, one thing I haven't put in the paper is that we're also working with our comms team to get some information and leaflets out to patients. I think it's really important when they've been on venous sample testing for years, we're now moving to finger prick testing, that we tell them that it's an improved service and why, and that know that that's coming. They should be very grateful because it'd be a lot less invasive for them, but that's something we've added in as well. For the other elements, the spirometry toolkit is still causing 1 or 2 concerns. I think I saw Chris with us somewhere, so I'm going to ask for his support to push that one forward on our behalf. And then with regards to the background information, the finances are all underway, and we've come in, John, you'll be very glad to know that we're so tight to budget, even I'm impressed as far as the overall delivery goes. And then the CQRS system is all being loaded up behind, and we've now got our first users testing it, and they've come back and said they're really easy and they're really appreciative of moving to a single platform. So I think that's the key updates from myself. We've still got bits and pieces to type, as you'd imagine, going forward. We've got the Arden searches, we're just tweaking, having validated them to make sure that what we wanted to achieve out of the LCSs is being captured by the clinical systems and therefore reported back to us in the way that we had hoped, because that's always in the detail where what we think we've asked isn't actually the response we're getting. So we're just clarifying those last 1 or 2 bits and we should be more or less ready to sign off. Any comments, queries or questions from anybody?
Oh no, I was just going to say you stunned us into submission, but you haven't. John has rescued our reputation. John.
Just a quick, it sounds really good progress as always, Gina, so thank you for that. Just one question, the bit in there that's talking about the patient survey, and I think that's in relation to the services that maybe had been provided previously in some patches and are no longer part of the offer for good reasons that we've rehearsed before. But is there anything that's come through from there at the moment that we think might be an issue, or nothing that we need to be conscious of?
Yes, apologies, I didn't miss that on purpose. I just didn't have it up on my second screen. There's 57 pages of comments that came back. We had lots of interactivity from patients, which is good. Some of it's really positive, some of it wasn't so positive. Paul, Martin, myself and Sadie are working on a kind of general response about how we're going to address it. But the thing that's hit me the most is how little patients are aware of the services we do offer within general practice. Some people thinking that, well, why can't we access this? Well, you can, and that's always been commissioned and that's always available. And then some queries and links, as you'd expect, as to, well, if they're doing this, why can't we get a dentist? You know, usual sort of responses will come through. But the biggest thing that hit me is how do we get out to our patients the services we are offering, not just in the front doors are open, but actually these are happening. This is, you know, business as usual. We have been doing this for a long time. So that's the thing that I think Paul and Sadie and I work on, as to how to try and get those messages across in a very easy to understand way. But yeah, the biggest concerns were with regards to the earwax removal. But we are working very closely with our community providers to manage the demand for that, as we expect to go through as far as microsuction goes, as opposed to irrigation.
That's great. Thank you, Gina.
Thanks.
Tracy?
Yeah, it's a very, very simple question in respect of the training, because I think some of the LCSs were probably quite different to what practices might have been used to before, and some kind of did come with recommended training, and certainly, so just wondering where we are with that, sort of thinking that we're now 2nd month into the LCS delivery, and practices inquiring about that training and where that kind of is and where we are with it, really.
Thanks, Tracy. So the training hub have been brilliant. We're working very closely with Claire, while she's there, and the team to pull that through, and all the newsletters that go out each month have the details of the LCS training in there. We've also created, Jasmine's created a document that's on our LCS Teams channel that has a summary of all the training that they need to access. Those that are compulsory, we are keeping a track of behind the scenes to see which practices are not attaining, and where those ones are to do with attendance and meetings and training that way, we're making sure that there's recordings available, and then they let us know when they've watched the recording in order to go through from there. We are working things like the warfarin with the suppliers to be able to enable it to be online training, and to have it certificated from that point of view. We've actually had practice come through as well, having done their safer surgery toolkit training, for example, on health inclusion, to come back and show us details from that. So I'm relatively confident that because we've given them resources in an easy to understand and accessible way, that we are, yeah, we're progressing from that point of view. Thank you.
Great. I think that's it from everybody. Thanks, Gina, for the update. Good to see continuing progress, and no doubt we will see you again.
Brilliant. Thanks all. Take care.
Thanks, Gina. On to the prescribing report, Michael.
Okay, thank you, Doris. My usual paper on this. I'll just take it as read, but highlight a few things. Big thing is that the CSU team is on track to be in-house to the ICB from the 1st of July, and this is very good news. The delay and uncertainty certainly led to a number of people leaving, particularly to go to PCN positions. We're carrying a few vacancies as a result, because we weren't sure when the in-housing was going to occur, but we are going ahead and working through those vacancies and create some slightly more flexible JDs, job descriptions, so that we can future-proof the team. I do gather my team tell me that it's possible that we may gain back some PCN posts into the ICB Meds team. I'm just commenting on what they've told me. So section 2.5 added a slightly amended section here. So month 11 is our latest data, which is February, and using the tool that we the tool that the CSU team produce, we're predicting 172.5 million outturn in net in GP prescribing. That obviously takes off any recharges and rebates, which can be quite significant in certain areas, which is predicting a 0.9% underspend on that net figure, which is slightly different to the gross figure that you'll see on the finance report, etc. DFMs we briefly touched on. So the three areas we are broadly improving all the time. The one that lags behind is the hypnotics and anxiolytics that John highlighted earlier. You can see from the graph in 3.3, the yellow dotted line is certainly the trajectory is faster than the trajectory decrease of our nearest two competitors. So if you extend that line somewhere in the future, we definitely will be crossing that line. We have a change in tack here. We were working with our biggest outlier in this particular area, and we've had some meetings and stakeholder meetings with some GPs. The UEA, although for technical reasons, that's now the University of Leicester, because the professor who was leading it in the UEA has left and joined the University of Leicester. So don't be confused when I talk about working with the UEA previously published opioid toolkit, as it's called, because the professor is now Professor of Behavioural Medicine at University of Leicester, etc. So in the pipeline at the moment is a press release about the work that we're doing with the organisation's Academic and Health and Science Network, and the fact that the East of England, NHS England, is working to roll it out across the East of England in terms of looking at behaviour changes and working to embed a pathway for GP practices to use for deprescribing and tapering dependence-forming medicines, which a lot of practices would just see as business as usual, but there are some practices who perhaps need, the structural support of a pathway and something to hang the work on, so to speak. So we're reaching out, as I say, to outliers on hypnotics and anxiolytics that we're currently not working with, who aren't showing improvement based on open prescribing, and similarly with gabapentinoids. And we're doing that by the end of the month, and perhaps next report, as I said earlier, we'll just highlight who we've reached out to and what response we've had. Opioids is actually included in, and I've done that in section 3.4, is included in the QOF this year. There's a module, a QI project, quality improvement project, which talks about an action plan for opioids. So we'll be encouraging our currently outlying practices to engage with that piece of work, because I think that would be quite useful for their next CQC visit, should there be one, as they are required to have some sort of quality improvement. So we'll be helping outlier practices on the other two indicators not currently showing improvement, not currently being worked with. Our biggest outlier is actually working with us now and is allowing us to make changes and improvements. So that should accelerate some of the improvement in anxiolytics and hypnotics. Usual thing with antibiotics. We have reached out to a fair few practices. I think we've mentioned Litcham and Munsley have been contacted, but no response as yet from those significant outliers. So perhaps thoughts welcomed on how we would escalate or just reiterate our offer of support to improve that. Certainly one of the biggest outliers is mentioned in that 4.4.3 section, perhaps I won't name them this time, but they have improved significantly after our audit and support. So it certainly does make a change and work. It's just the willingness of practices to work with us. Your thoughts and comments are welcomed.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions for Michael, Tracy?
Just a bit of comment about the gabapentinoids. I mean, we've kind of deteriorated slightly with that one, and I think that's another ongoing kind of battle, isn't it, with practices, and just wondering kind of, you know, the combination of all three and kind of what that support is around that particularly. And going back to the antibiotics, I mean, what's kind of in the PCN? Is there kind of an approach, certainly working with peers in the PCN approach to some of those kind of, particularly the antibiotic ones, as a quality kind of incentive as a PCN as a whole, and peer support, as opposed to kind of coming in? I don't know if that might be an approach that might be more acceptable to some practices, perhaps.
It's an approach willing to have a stab at. Certainly, so you're thinking through clinical directors. We usually perceive them as being too busy to welcome much input from the meds team, but I would welcome and I will commit to approaching PCN clinical director meetings and suggest that, particularly in outliers, which is the West, in some of these, that we have those conversations. Yes, so I will commit to reaching out to clinical directors and offering that as a PCN project, perhaps, which might be, as you say, more palatable rather than individual practices feeling they're being picked on. Yeah, okay, and working with triple therapy. I mean, that was a piece of work that we were starting when COVID hit, focusing on patients on triple therapy, which is the of the highest risk patients. The latest thinking is that patients on high dose opioids and getting those off high dose opioids has the biggest impact on risk reduction. So, you know, it's opioids first is in terms of reduction, and hence the UEA, University of Leicester, focus on opioid deprescribing particularly at the moment. And we hope the press release gets picked up and we can have some useful conversations around that in public. Because that can help GPs deal with patients who perceive it as something that shouldn't necessarily be undone because it was started by a specialist. They're high dose opioids for chronic pain, which is an ongoing struggle, I know, for some practices.
Thank you. And Hein.
I had something very similar to Tracy, but Tracy phrased it much better than I could have done. So I think there is something that maybe PCN realizes: you don't want to be an outlier. It's not the place you want to be. Maybe they can have a conversation that's maybe less confrontational with the relevant practice. So yeah, I would encourage that route. And it's quality, but sometimes I get a sense, but I'm a lay member, that safety is a consideration in some of this as well. So yeah, I would encourage what was just mentioned. Thanks. Okay.
I mean, certainly the measure is in that we've used there is PCNs, and then we go on to name the outliers within those PCNs. So perhaps yeah, okay, that is a route we will endeavour to go down, and we'll let you know how we get on with that.
Okay, John.
Yeah, the suggestion I was going to make on that was whether it's something that has been discussed or could be discussed at the CCG Clinical Executive, just to get a broader clinical view and maybe clinical support, peer-to-peer discussions between GPs, whether that would be helpful, I don't know.
Yeah, okay, well, I can put it on as perhaps an agenda item to look at. I think we have talked about antibiotics in the past at KEC, but it's probably due a refresh and just get their buy-in. I think, as you say, it would be useful if it came from GP colleagues within that clinical leadership group as a recommendation that PCN clinical directors work with us to deal with it, because it has worked in the practices that have let us in. You know, we've made changes. Obviously, they've made the changes, but we've just facilitated and encouraged that change.
I was just wondering whether there is any mileage in, developing some case studies where practices have worked, just, and maybe it's their story to say, actually, it wasn't very painful and the benefits was X, Y, and Z, rather than our point of view is their point of view in terms of engagement and how it worked for them.
Okay, I will try and collect those. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other questions or comments, I will move on to the finance report. James.
Thank you. As usual, I'll take the report as read, but highlight the key points in the report to you and also clarify some of the points made in the report. So on the exec summary, we can see the final position as at month 12. The total primary care and prescribing budgets are 1.3 million adverse to budget, with a final expenditure total of £408.1 million. The final position includes all retrospective WAF and R's allocation received and matched against expenditure. To give context, the overall CCG final position at the end of the year was 0.6 million surplus to budget and a total expenditure of just over 2.1 billion. Moving on to the financial summary, it shows that GP prescribing has deteriorated by 0.3 million from month 11 to month 12. With the figures being 2 months in arrears, this is an undervaluation of the January estimate. In addition, efficiency savings has not materialised in this period, putting pressure on the forecast, with efficiency savings already baked into the budget. Prescribing efficiency target, as previously reported, has been revised down from 2.5 to 1.2 million, and there's been changes. And the deterioration of 0.3 million has also been due to changes in the rebates received and incentive funds, which have contributed to this 0.3 million deterioration. Delegated primary care has increased by 0.4 million, which is growth within the R's funding. And there was also an increase in GPIT, which relates to additional data line costs and various service upgrades within GPIT. On the detailed financial analysis page, it shows the key drivers behind the prescribing overspend of 4.8 million against budget and some of these areas that are attempting to mitigate this. And then moving into the specific funding areas, see the System Development Fund. Its key area of investment is still shown predominantly on, it has delivered on plan with a few small favourable variances to budget. Then in delegated co-commissioning, the same favourable variance is showing here in terms of the Norwich APMS contract, favourable rent revaluations offset by the pressure on QOF of the indicators that passed the CCG from NHS England at the beginning of the financial year, with also the prior year accrual releases within delegated. All the additional WAF and R's income has been fully received and expensed as at month 12. Then the detail on GP and other prescribing, total variance of 4.8 million includes a prior year release of 1.78 million. So the underlying variance within this prior year benefit is, once this is excluded, is 6.58. This has been driven by growing direct pressures, COVID-related prescribing, and lower than expected efficiency achievement, with additional pressures outside from dressings and oxygen. That was all my points. If there are any questions.
Thanks, James. Any question for James? Hi.
Yeah, thanks, James. I'm always conscious that we got a fair bit of help on what you call a prior year benefit of significant accrual. So yeah, you've just gone through the accrual exercise for the recent financial year. Any comments from our auditors in the approach we've taken, or
still too early in that process? We're very early in that in there. We've only just been given the auditors the accrual details for that, so we're a little bit too early to have any comments back from them at this moment.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. If there's no other questions for James, no. Thanks for the report. Are there any questions from the public, Sarah, that's since we've started the meeting?
Not that I know of, no.
No. Okay, thank you very much. So that takes us to end of part one. I still achieved a 10-minute early. I thought we were going to be a bit more closer to call today. So I thank you all for this afternoon and look forward to seeing you all again in June. And for those who are joining us back in part two, if we have a 10-minute comfort break and reconvene at 3:20, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.